Buy, sell or rent your property with Century 21 and you could win a brand new 2-bedroom apartment on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. Visit c21win.com.au for your chance to win.
Welcome back to Your Property Empire. Well, joining me on the show tonight is Andrew Reckman from realestate.com.au, and we've just been joined by Evan Yanitsas from, the Chief Financial Controller from Century 21 Australasia. Anyway, now it's time for Purchase or Pass. Now, in our Purchase or Pass segment this week, we take a look at a property as advertised as having parking, but all is not as it seems. It's a 2-bed, 1-bath unit with parking, 8.3 kilometres from the CBD and less than 500 metres to the local action. At 110 square metres, it's one of the largest units in the area and boasts a north-facing garden. It's situated in a small Federation block of 4 and has 3.2-metre high pattern ceilings and lime-washed floorboards. It's advertised as having a parking area, but you can only get 2 cars in there. It recently sold for $1.35 million and rents for approximately about $900 a week. Now, good to see you on the show, Evan. Thanks for filling in for Charles Tarbey. He's on his awards night.
He is, yes.
So, obviously, look, I mean, you're fairly kind of close in the area as well, but 110 square metres, for a lot of people around Australia, that's pretty small, but in those areas, it's pretty large. How important is size on a property?
Look, size for a property, especially a rental property, is very important. 110 square metres represents pretty good size. The issue, as you pointed out, though, is the parking for this one, and that's something I think we should discuss. Is parking important? Do we need parking? I think yes, especially for an investment property. But yeah, these are the things to consider for this property, and I think that the yield, as we saw there, wasn't as high as it could have been, and I think the introduction of, if it had its designated car spot, that could really improve the rental return and increase the yield, make it a bit much more worthwhile investment.
Yeah, so certainly things to think about. Now, obviously, one of the main things here is it's got a garden.
Yep.
You see, obviously, the adverts, and on your side, you can tick if you want those kind of things. How rare is it to have something like that, again, in the inner city?
Yeah, look, I think being in the inner city and having that green space is a real positive for this property. And, you know, it does have that drawback of the scattered parking or shared parking, but it's got size, and not just the whole block size of 110 square metres, but also the individual bedrooms are a really big size. And so we see a lot more people actually wanting to see big bedrooms rather than more bedrooms. So I think this place does a good job of presenting that. And then the outdoor area is a real bonus as well. So in an apartment, you're almost getting an extra room for those in Sydney 7 or 8 months of the year when you can be living outside. So any sort of outdoor area we see as a big driver of engagement. So anytime there's a balcony, a small garden or a courtyard, we see a lot more interest for people looking at our properties.
Yeah, and I guess it all comes down to the competition. I mean, we were talking earlier on about things like Go Get, or even having a
stacker.
A car stacker. That's an opportunity these days.
I mean, the body corporate here could definitely, maybe not for this property, but it could consider putting in a stacker. This way, every property would be able to have a car park on title, and that will definitely increase the rental yield, making this property a lot more attractive to investors.
And again, looking at some of the other properties, say around the CBDs and in these bigger developments, quite often they have kind of the bike racks and the motorcycles and even shared bikes you see in a lot of the, I noticed up in Brisbane and places like that, that it is a different way of thinking. So I've always been very set on the parking, but it's a changing world, isn't it?
I think if you get into the inner city areas and those really tight inner city suburbs, a place like West End in Brisbane, and in the Perth CBD area, I think parking's becoming less of an issue potentially for those who work in the CBD, live in the CBD, and they do have access to Uber, Go Get, all those other ride-sharing services, as well as the good old taxi every now and then.
Yeah, and I guess with the scattered parking as well is different. If you normally come home at about 3 in the afternoon, say you pick up the kids, that's probably actually an advantage, whereas if you're a late night, say if you're an accountant or a real estate agent working till 9 or 10 at night,
it's not going to be good, is it?
You're going to be the last one.
The thing that tends to happen to these is usually a status quo forms until a new tenant moves in, then they're sort of up in the air again until everything settles down. So yeah.
So purchase or pass for you?
Pass for me.
And what about yourself?
I'll be contrarian. I'll purchase.
You're going to go for a purchase? Sounds good. Now, for me, while scattered parking is better than no parking, I'd rather wait and find something with a guaranteed space. And the low yield gives a hint to me that someone may be paid over the odds as they really wanted that garden apartment, because they are pretty unique. So, at the moment, I'd pass as well. Anyway, now it's time to take a look around the country and we'll see what is happening with election auction clearance rates. So you've got all the numbers. We'll fire away with the first graph, auction clearances.
Sure. Well, the national auction clearance rate is 71.3% for this week. The clearance rate's still going well, although not as high as it was last year when it was 78.6%. Sydney and Melbourne continue to lead the way with 74.1% for Sydney and 74.2% for Melbourne there.
Wonderful. So certainly things going on well with the graph there. What about homes advertised for sale?
Look, after a drop 3 weeks ago, we've seen 2 steady weeks of increases for homes for sale. Now, this is sort of bucking the trend. When we get into cooler months, we tend to see things stock on the market slacking off, but we've seen 2 steady increases of 1.86% this week over last week's increase of 1.13%. New Zealand still taking the more traditional winter route with a decrease of 2.8% over the last week.
Yeah, and I was just over in New Zealand and they're still all pretty confident over there. The market seems to be doing pretty well.
Yeah, they're still having more traditional seasons in real estate, but we've sort of been immune from a real winter here for a while, but yeah, New Zealand haven't really had that same effect.
OK, and what about the rent price movements?
Sure. Rent prices this week have dropped 0.24%, which coincidentally is the same as the increase they had last week. So net effect 0 over 2 weeks. But the positive news is there's 0.96% increase for year to date. And we've seen a real levelling out and steady levelling out of rent prices, and hoping there's no surprises in this week's budget, things should continue the same with that.
That's good, and yeah, we'll be talking about the budget next week, I think. And finally, the vacancy rates.
Sure, vacancy rates for nationally are 4.21%. Pretty steady, but WA still seems to be the issue that we've noticed, a 7.54% vacancy rate, well above the national trend. I guess the knock-on effect here for landlords will be potential falling rents to attract and keep good tenants.
So, wonderful, sounds good. Now, obviously, you're the Chief Financial Controller at
Correct,
Century
yes.
21. You're obviously speaking to the agents and probably collecting the bills and all the rest of it and speak to them all the time. How do you generally find the mood within the property market from the agent's perspective?
Look, it's been very different. The Eastern Seaboard's been couldn't complain really. There has been a general slow off, but no real issues. But the Western Australia's really struggled, and that sort of reflects in the conversations I have with people. But overall, the sentiment's quite good. Happy with where things are going. Low interest rates are certainly helping. As long as things stay the way they are, we should have a pretty good future.
Yeah. And how about you, with speaking to the agents all the time as well?
Yeah, look, I think there was a bit of a tough few months. The last few months we had that early Easter, school holidays in Victoria, school holidays in New South Wales, so there has been a bit of a slowdown in the last couple of months in the number of listings coming onto our site. Last few weeks, a real rebound, so a really strong April, a lot more activity, a lot more properties on the market, which should be good for the agents and also good for vendors and buyers in the market.
Wonderful. Fingers crossed. Well, Andrew from realestate.com and everyone from Century 21, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for joining us as well. We'll be back again next week, probably talking about the budget. Hopefully the world won't have come to an end and the property market will still be fine. So we'll see you next week. Until then, I'm Chris Gray. Good night.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.